Charleston, 1856. The night was still, but the air stank of sin and smoke. Inside the judge's grand white mansion, the candles trembled as screams tore through velvet walls. By dawn, she was dead, the judge's wife, found tangled in silk and blood beside her slave. Whispers spread faster than the fire that soon followed. Love had crossed the lines of chains and law, and someone, somewhere, swore to bury the truth before sunrise. I remember the smell of magnolias and sweat that hung over Charleston like a curse that summer of 1856, the kind of heat that made chains bite deeper and hearts rot faster. I was called Isaiah, though my mother had named me something softer, something stolen by the auction block before I could even speak it. On Judge Whitmore's plantation, names were traded like horses, and souls were measured by how long they could endure the whip without screaming. Every dawn began the same, the clang of the overseer's bell, the hiss of dew on iron, the groan of weary bodies forced back to the earth that would never love us back. The judge ruled not only the courtroom, but the lives of every breathing thing on his land. He was the law, the scripture, and the devil in one polished skin. Beside him stood his wife, Evelyn Whitmore, a woman whose beauty was the kind that blinded men and condemned women. She was porcelain and perfume and hidden sorrow, her smile a disguise worn like silk. I first saw her properly the morning she rode her white mare through the fields, her parasol tilted, her gloves spotless, her eyes tracing the horizon as though she were searching for something she could never name. When her gaze fell on me, it lingered not in command, but in curiosity. A glance, just that, yet it burned longer than any sun. I looked away, but something in me shifted, something forbidden and alive. Days became weeks, and I began to sense her presence even when she wasn't near. Sometimes she would stand at the edge of the veranda, watching us work with that strange, hollow ache in her eyes. The judge was a man of loud judgments and quiet cruelties. She, of silence and secrets. Rumor had it she had lost a child once, a little boy who never took his first breath, and since then, laughter had become a language she could no longer speak. One evening, while hauling water near the garden, I heard her voice, soft, trembling, almost afraid of the air itself. "Isaiah," she said, and it was the first time my name had sounded like something holy. She asked me about the field, about the songs we sang, about the meaning behind the humming that rose at sundown. Her curiosity was gentle, but her eyes carried a loneliness that no wealth could cure. I answered cautiously, knowing every word between us could hang me by dawn. Still, her questions returned night after night, carried on candlelight and shadows. Then came the rainstorm that changed everything. The judge had left for Columbia to preside over some trial, leaving the mansion cloaked in thunder and the servants shivering in corners. I was ordered to bring firewood to the main hall. When I stepped inside, soaked and trembling, she stood there barefoot, her hair undone, her tears invisible in the rain that dripped from her lashes. She looked less like a mistress and more like a soul waiting to be forgiven. "Stay," she whispered. I should have left. God knows I should have. But her hand found mine, and the distance between chains and freedom vanished in a single heartbeat. Her touch was warm, desperate, alive, the touch of someone who had never been held for love, only for duty. That night, the storm outside became a reflection of the one within us. We crossed a line drawn not just by skin, but by centuries of cruelty. In the mornings that followed, the world seemed quieter, the fields less cruel. She began to leave small gifts, a ribbon, a piece of bread, a glance that dared the heavens to intervene. Yet, beneath every heartbeat, there lurked the sound of footsteps, the overseer's eyes, the judge's shadow, the inevitable punishment that waited like a serpent coiled beneath the bed. I knew we were doomed the moment love began to feel real, because in Charleston, a slave's heart was never his own, and a white woman's mercy was always borrowed time. But still, I could not turn away. Not from her, not from what we had awakened, because even in chains, I felt freer with her than I had ever felt beneath God's sky. What I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was that every secret love story in Charleston ends the same way, with blood, silence, and a lie written into history. It began with whispers, the kind that slither through walls and rot through the heart before reaching the ear. Someone had seen us. Or maybe they only thought they had. On a plantation, suspicion was a sport, and loyalty was just another word for survival. I noticed the overseer, Mr. Crane, watching me longer than usual, his pale eyes narrowing like a hawk that had finally spotted its prey. He had a cruel way of smiling, as if every grin carried the promise of pain. Evelyn sensed it too. Her letters grew shorter, her visits fewer, her fear louder. We'd meet in the shadows of the old stable, the smell of hay and sweat thick as sin between us. She'd tremble as she spoke, her words cracking like dry leaves. He suspects something, Isaiah. The judge will know. He always knows. I wanted to tell her it would be fine, that love could survive even in a world built from hate. But I had seen too many backs split open, too many men broken just for looking where they shouldn't. The judge had a habit of making examples, and when he did, the land itself seemed to remember. One night, after a long day in the fields, the overseer called me aside. His breath reeked of whiskey, his voice dripping with venom. "You've been working hard lately, boy," he said, dragging the word boy like a blade across my skin. "Milady seems mighty fond of your diligence. Maybe too fond." He chuckled, stepping closer until I could see the cruelty glinting behind his eyes. "Careful now. Judge Whitmore don't take kindly to familiarity." That night, I couldn't sleep. The air was heavy, and every creak of the shack felt like a footstep. I thought of Evelyn, her pale hands, her trembling lips, the sadness she wore like perfume, and wondered if I had doomed her by loving her. The world had never allowed a slave to hold anything pure, and now I had touched what belonged to power itself. The next morning, word spread across the quarters like wildfire. The judge was returning early. The trial had ended sooner than expected. Evelyn's face that afternoon was ghost white when she found me near the garden. She spoke barely above a whisper, her gloved hand shaking. "He cannot know, Isaiah," she said, her voice breaking on every word. "If he finds out, he'll kill you, and I think he'll kill me too." I remember wanting to run, to flee into the swamps beyond Charleston, where moss dripped like old tears and the law couldn't follow. But she couldn't leave. She was bound by more invisible chains than I could count. Her name, her wealth, her gender, her fear. And so, we stayed, two souls trapped inside the same cage, pretending the walls weren't closing in. When the judge returned, the mansion fell silent. His footsteps echoed through the halls like a verdict being written. He greeted Evelyn with a kiss that looked more like a sentence than affection. At supper, I was ordered to serve at the table. Every movement felt like standing before a firing squad. Evelyn's hand trembled as she lifted her glass, her eyes darting to me once, briefly, as if saying goodbye. Then, the judge looked up. "Isaiah," he said, his tone too calm, too soft. "You've been tending the roses lately, haven't you?" "Yes, master," I replied, my voice hollow. He smiled, a smile that never reached his eyes. "Good. I do appreciate a man who knows how to keep things alive." I knew then that he knew. The table fell silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock and the sound of Evelyn's breath catching in her throat. Later that night, I found a note beneath the loose floorboard near the pantry, a single line written in her delicate hand. "Meet me at the old church tomorrow, before dawn." The church stood beyond the swamp, long abandoned, its windows shattered and its altar half-eaten by ivy. It was where the slaves once prayed when no white eyes watched. It was where I first kissed her, where love and fear had become one. But as I held that note, I felt the walls of the world closing in. The judge's shadow had already reached us, and I could almost hear the faint whisper of a rope swinging in the distance. Because on the Whitmore plantation, love was never forgiven, and dawn was always followed by blood. The night before I was to meet her, the wind itself seemed to hold its breath. The moon sat low over Charleston, half hidden behind clouds that looked like bruises across the sky. Every sound carried weight, the creak of the shacks, the rustle of leaves, the distant barking of dogs. Something deep inside me whispered that the world was shifting, that something irreversible was about to happen. When the first light of dawn began to crawl across the marshes, I made my way to the old church, barefoot, silent, my heart beating like a drum against my ribs. The place was rotting, the wood damp, the air thick with mildew and memory. Candles still stood on the altar, melted into shapeless ghosts. And there she was, Evelyn, cloaked in gray, her hair undone, her eyes swollen from crying. "I can't stay here anymore," she said before I could even speak. "He's been asking questions. He knows I've been leaving the house at night." I think Crane told him. I stepped closer, wanting to hold her, to make the world stop, but fear clung to us both like smoke. She took my hand, small, trembling, and pressed something into my palm. It was a small vial, filled with a clear, bitter liquid. "I can't kill him, Isaiah," she whispered, "but I can end this before he destroys us both." Her plan was madness, yet I saw the resolve in her eyes. The poison was meant for herself, not him. She'd rather die than face the judge's wrath, rather vanish than watch me hang from his oak tree. I felt the world collapse around me in that moment. All I had ever known was survival, but this was despair disguised as mercy. "No," I said, my voice rough, almost breaking. "If there's to be death, it won't be yours." She looked at me then, truly looked, as if she was seeing the man beneath the chains for the first time. The silence between us carried 1,000 unspoken words. Then I took the vial and slipped it into my pocket, though I didn't yet know what to do with it. We returned to the mansion separately, pretending as if nothing had happened. But that night, the judge called for a private supper, only him and his wife. The servants were told to prepare a feast of duck, sweet wine, and roasted pears. I was ordered to serve again. As I moved between the kitchen and dining room, I could feel the tension crawling through the air like invisible smoke. Evelyn's hands trembled as she poured his wine. He spoke little, his gaze heavy, calculating. Then, midway through the meal, he set down his fork and stared directly at me. "Isaiah," he said softly, almost kindly, "you've grown confident, haven't you? Tell me, have you forgotten your place?" I froze. Evelyn's breath hitched, her eyes darting between us. He reached for his glass, the same glass she had filled only moments ago, and raised it in a mock toast. "To loyalty," he said, and drank. I remember every heartbeat that followed, slow, stretched, unbearable. For a moment, I thought perhaps fate had chosen mercy. But then his expression changed. His eyes widened, his hand clutching at his throat as the color drained from his face. Evelyn screamed, rushing toward him, though I could not tell whether it was in fear or relief. He gasped once, twice, then collapsed against the table, his wine spilling like blood across the linen. The vial. She must have poured it when I wasn't looking. Everything happened too fast. Servants ran, doors slammed, and the overseer burst in shouting orders. Evelyn fell to her knees, her sobs shaking the floor. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her away before they saw, but then Crane's voice cut through the chaos. It was him, the slave. I saw him near the glass. Before I could move, two men seized me. Their fists found my ribs, their boots my face. The world turned red and black in pain. Through it all, I saw her, Evelyn, screaming my name, trying to speak, but they dragged her away, her white dress streaked with her husband's blood. That night, I was chained in the cellar beneath the mansion, the same cellar where they stored the judge's brandy and secrets. I could hear her above me, crying, begging, praying. Then, silence. I didn't know it yet, but by dawn, she would be found dead beside me, her wrist torn, her face pale, her lips still shaped around my name. They said she killed herself out of guilt, but I knew the truth. The judge had poisoned himself with his own cruelty, and the world decided to bury her alongside his sins. What I did next would make Charleston remember our names forever. They said dawn came gentle that morning, but I never saw it. Not through the darkness of that cellar, not through the cracks of the floorboards dripping with her blood. The world above me had gone silent, like Charleston itself was holding its breath in shame. Evelyn was gone. My heart, the only thing they hadn't beaten out of me, felt like it had turned to ash. The chains on my wrists were slick with rust and blood, and the air smelled of salt and death. When the door finally opened, it wasn't God who came for me. It was Crane, the overseer, his face twisted with triumph. "She's dead," he spat, his words thick with hate and whiskey. "You'll swing for her, boy. The judge's wife, dead with her lover, a fitting end for filth like you." He thought fear would make me beg. He thought chains could break a heart already shattered. But something inside me had shifted the moment I heard she was gone. Love had burned itself into rage, and grief had become the weapon I never knew I carried. They planned to hang me by noon, right there in the courtyard beneath the old oak where the judge once held his Sunday sermons. The townsfolk would gather, they said, to watch justice be done. I laughed when I heard that word, justice. What did they know of justice, those who built their heaven on our bones? When Crane left to prepare the gallows, I sat alone in that cellar and stared at the faint light cutting through the boards. It fell across the table where they had laid her body. Even in death, she looked at peace, her hair spilling like gold across her neck, her hands folded as if in prayer. They had washed her clean, but no water could wash away the truth. And then I saw it. The vial, small, half shattered, lying near the wine cask. My heart stuttered. She hadn't used it all. I worked the chains until my wrists tore open. Pain became nothing but noise. I pressed the broken edge of my shackle against the wall again and again until the bolt gave way. My freedom didn't come with a song. It came with a scream. By the time Crane returned, the cellar door was open, the candles flickering, and I was standing behind him. His voice caught in his throat when he turned. I saw fear bloom in his eyes, the same fear I'd known my whole life. You should be." I didn't let him finish. The chain in my hand came down like the weight of 100 years of silence. Blah. Twice. Again. When he fell, the earth didn't tremble, but something in me finally did. His blood smelled like rust and rain. I took his keys, his knife, and his torch and stepped into the hall. The mansion loomed quiet, its white walls now yellowed by candle smoke. The judge's portrait stared down from above the fireplace, proud, merciless, eternal. But tonight, his empire would burn. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, lighting every curtain, every rug, every memory. Flames began to crawl up the wallpaper, devouring the lies this house was built upon. And when I reached the parlor where they had laid Evelyn's body, I knelt beside her one last time. "I couldn't save you," I whispered, "but I can make them remember you." I pressed the last drop of poison against my lips, not to die, but to kiss her goodbye. Then I took the torch and set her shroud aflame. By the time the townsfolk gathered, the mansion was an inferno, its columns cracking, its windows bursting with screams and smoke. They said later they saw a man standing in the flames, his skin glowing like bronze under the firelight, his eyes fixed on the heavens. They said he didn't run. Maybe they were right. Because I wasn't escaping, I was ending it. The plantation burned until nothing remained but ash and bone. The oak where they planned to hang me split in two when the fire reached it. Like even the tree refused to bear the weight of another body. And when the sky turned red above Charleston, the whispers began again. The judge's wife, they said, died for love. Her slave lover, they said, vanished into the flames. But the truth was far crueler and far more beautiful. We didn't die that night. We became legend. They said the fire burned for 3 days, a storm of smoke and judgment rising over Charleston, blackening the sky as if heaven itself had turned its face away. I remember none of it clearly, only fragments that come and go like ghosts in the dark. The smell of ash in my lungs, the roar of timber collapsing, the feeling of her hand slipping from mine as the flames swallowed everything we were. I woke up by the river, my body burned, my skin blistered, my wrists still bruised by iron. The night air was cold and thick with fog, the city far behind me, glowing faintly like a dying ember. Somehow, the fire had spared me, though I wasn't sure if that was mercy or punishment. The world felt quieter now, stripped of sound, stripped of meaning. They believed I was dead, the slave who burned the judge's mansion and perished with his sin. I let them believe it. The hounds searched for days, but the swamp was vast, and I had learned to vanish long before that night. I wandered for weeks through the Carolina wilderness, half alive, half something else. The moss hung heavy. The trees whispered my name. Every ripple in the water reminded me of Evelyn's voice, soft and trembling. I carried the memory of her face like a flame inside me, one that refused to die. There were nights I slept beneath the stars, listening to the echoes of the world that had once held us captive. The whip cracks, the hymns, the hollow laughter of the judge, all gone now, turned to smoke. Yet even in freedom, I could not breathe. I reached a small settlement on the edge of Georgia, a place built by those who had escaped like me. They called it Haven's Reach. The people there looked at my scars and said nothing. They knew the language of pain. They gave me shelter, food, silence. For months, I worked in the fields again, but this time, the soil felt different. It didn't command. It listened. Still, the nights never gave me peace. I'd see her in my dreams, Evelyn, standing in her white dress at the edge of the water, her lips moving without sound. Sometimes she'd smile. Other times, she'd weep. I tried to build a life, to bury the memory under work and prayer. But ghosts have long memories. One winter morning, a trader passed through the settlement. He brought news from Charleston. They rebuilt the Whitmore mansion, he said, sipping his coffee. But the land never took to it again. Crops withered. Animals died. They say it's cursed, that the judge's wife still walks the grounds at night. I said nothing, but my hands shook. The thought of her, still there, still bound to that place, tore through me like a knife. That night, I walked to the riverbank and looked toward the south, where the horizon shimmered faintly under the moon. And for the first time in months, I prayed. Not for forgiveness, not for peace, but for remembrance. I wanted the world to remember her, not as the judge's wife, not as a scandal, not as a sin, but as a woman who dared to love beyond chains and color. Because that's what they feared most in Charleston. Not rebellion, not blood, but love that refused to obey. Years passed. My hair turned gray. My body slowed, but my heart never did. Some nights, I'd sit by the fire and tell her story to the young ones in the camp. They'd listen wide-eyed as I spoke of a mansion that burned, of a woman who defied her husband, of a man who rose from ashes. They'd ask, was it true? And I'd smile through the smoke. Truth, I'd tell them, isn't what's written by the judges or carved on the tombstones. Truth is what the fire remembers. I never went back to Charleston. But sometimes, when the wind carried the scent of magnolia through the pines, I'd close my eyes and hear her voice again, whispering my name like a secret the world could never kill. They think the fire ended our story. But I know better. The fire was only the beginning. There comes a time when the living and the dead are not so different, when memory itself becomes a kind of graveyard. I have walked through both. I have breathed the air of freedom, and it still tastes of smoke. Even after all these years, I wake before dawn and feel the weight of those chains that no longer exist, and I wonder if ghosts feel lighter than the living. They say Charleston has forgotten us. The judge's mansion is gone now, nothing but ivy and ruin. Tourists pass by and whisper of tragedy, of scandal, of forbidden sin, never love. They call her the judge's wife who died for shame. They never say her name. They never speak mine. The truth is too dangerous for history to remember. But the land remembers. When the wind moves through the ruins, it carries her laughter, faint, fragile, like a song half lost to time. The magnolia trees bloom even where the soil turned black from fire. Some nights, the people in town say they see a light in the distance, a figure in white walking through the smoke, her shadow beside a man whose wrists still shine with broken iron. They call it a haunting. I call it homecoming, because I never truly left her. Not the night she died, not the morning I fled, not the years I wandered pretending to be a man again. My body aged, but part of me is still there, still kneeling beside her as the house burned, still whispering promises that the world tried to silence. I used to wonder if love could survive death. Now I know it does, but it doesn't stay gentle. Love that crosses chains and graves becomes something else, something unholy and eternal. It becomes a vow carved into the bones of the earth. There are moments when I feel her near me. When the rain falls heavy and the air smells of ash, I feel her hand on my shoulder, her breath on my neck. I hear her voice say, "You kept your promise, Isaiah." And I know she's not gone. Not while I remember. Not while I speak her name aloud beneath the stars. Evelyn Whitmore. The woman who defied her world for a single taste of truth. The woman who loved a man they called property and saw in him a soul brighter than her own reflection. I once believed the fire was punishment, that God had turned his wrath upon us. But I see now it was revelation. The fire was truth made visible. It burned through the lies, the laws, the chains, and for one fleeting moment, it showed the world what we were. Not master and slave, not sin and virtue, just two souls wanting to be free. And maybe that is why Charleston will always whisper our names when the night grows still. Because deep down, every soul trapped by fear or shame or pride remembers what it means to burn for something real. So if you ever stand where the mansion once stood, if you feel the wind shift and smell magnolia and smoke, listen closely. You might hear her laughter, soft as a prayer. You might feel my footsteps echo through the ground beneath you. And if your heart trembles, don't be afraid. That's just the truth waking up. Because love like ours doesn't die. It lingers, patient, waiting for the next heart brave enough to carry its flame. I am Isaiah, once bound, once lost, now nothing but memory and fire. And she was Evelyn, the judge's wife, my forbidden light. They buried us under silence, but silence is just the soil where stories grow. And now, every time a spark rises in the dark, every time a voice dares to tell what was never meant to be told, we rise again, together, from the ashes of Charleston. Still burning, still remembering, still free.